Record. Hello there. This is Bill Rogers Sunday School class. We're continuing our study in the Gospel of John. We're in John chapter 19, the death of Jesus on the cross. They had the resurrection lesson back on Easter Sunday, so we're picking up and moving forward to that point. And then we've got, after this, two more lessons in the Gospel of John. But here we go. We're going to pick up in John chapter 19 at verse 17. And it says, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is in Hebrew Golgotha. And there they crucified him. Now, the gospel writers don't focus much on detail about what crucifixion was. Number one, it was shameful. It was a horrible, torturous way to die, very cruel. And apparently the Romans were crucifying people all the time. They would crucify them at crossroads so that passerby could see this is what happens to people that oppose Rome. And it says bearing his cross, the actual word there would be for the crossbeam, that they would leave the verticals in place and then have a way to hoist up the crucifixion, the victim. They would take them to the place, nail their hands, sometimes tie their arms down. They would nail at the base of the palm or at the wrist. Some people, they have actually found skeletons with the scars of the nails from crucifixions, the scrape marks on the bone. And so they know it's not just the palm of the hand right here. That was theorized that would actually pull through. But then they would hoist the person up, set it in perhaps a notch on the cross. Some people think it was like a letter T, and then they would nail the feet down. Later on, after this era, they would actually put a projection that the body would rest on, not just the feet. But at this time, they think it was hands and feet. The gospel writers do not linger over this sort of detail. And it says he was, and where they crucified him with two others with him, one on either side and Jesus in the center. Since Barabbas was released at the request, the offer of every year I release a prisoner on Passover, and who do you want? And they said Barabbas. They think that maybe these three guys were revolutionaries, Barabbas and the other two, and they would have all been crucified this day. And the word that describes them as variously thieves, malefactors, criminals, or it can be revolutionaries. And the guys actually said, the thief on the cross, as he's called, says, we deserve this. If you can imagine a person being tortured to death saying, I deserve this. But Jesus did not. That's that kind of criminal that is a terribly evil person that is on the cross. And it is of great comfort then to those who have turned to Jesus for rest and rescue to know that even at this last moment, this guy's going to be with Jesus in paradise. And so can we turn to him. We place ourselves on his sacrifice. So that's the other two guys are variously described in the four Gospels. Okay, now it says in verse 19, Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And it says it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. What would be done kind of as a tutorial, don't mess with Rome, is they would put the crime the person was convicted of and carried on a placard, or sometimes it was written on a card of some kind, a notice of some kind, and carried around the neck as they carried their crossbeam. John does not put the part in about Simon of Cyrene, who was conscripted to carry the crossbeam because Jesus was too weak to carry it. But here, the placard, it says, Pilate himself wrote it. I had not ever noticed that before. Did he actually, or, he could have said, here, write this down, and the scribe would have written it down and they put it, but it would have been fastened on the cross somewhere where all the passerbys could see. Now, what was the reason for having it in all three languages? And so Pilate was trying to set Jesus free, but they threatened him with turning him into Rome. He already had one bad mark against him, and guys in his position could actually be recalled to Rome and executed for incompetence. And he had a riot had ensued, and he had had a bunch of citizens killed. And now the priests are saying, we're going to turn you into Rome if you don't do this, because you're no friend of Rome. And so Pilate, we think, to get back at them, to kind of tweak their nose, writes this, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. One of the points of today's lesson is he was meaning that mockingly. The Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin leaders, the high priest, the family of the priest, all had said, no, don't say that. He's not our king. We have no king but Caesar, actually, where they are in their own way denying God when they said that. Now Caesar is tweaking their noses, so to speak, by saying this is the King of the Jews. That's his crime. That's why he's being killed. And Jesus has said, my kingdom is not of this world. In fact, if you go back in 19, verse 7, right above where our lesson starts today. It's a phenomenal thing. They're saying, crucify him. And the Jews answered him, we have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid. And he went again to the praetorium and said to Jesus, where are you from? Because in the Roman, and before that, the Greek pantheon, the gods would sometimes come down in disguise and interact with human beings. And there was that story that Paul and it was either Barnabas or Silas ran into a city where they had a myth that the gods had visited there and were unrecognized and poured out their wrath because they were not received hospitably. Here, I think that's some of the same thing. He's saying, wait a minute. His wife has warned him, have nothing to do with this just man. He's innocent. And he says, wait, where are you from? He's asking him that. But Jesus gave him no answer. He's already told him, my kingdom is not of this world. And this ought to be terrifying to Pontius Pilate. And then verse 12, it says, from then on, Pontius Pilate sought to release him, but they cried out the more, if you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. We have no king but Caesar. How about you? And so it's a very complex psychology involved with this guy Pilate, and those of us, it's a very modern sensibility, very Western thought, where he says what is truth, and he's caught in the machinations of the politics of his position, afraid for his life if he oversteps the bounds too far one way. If he doesn't take action, he can be recalled back to Rome himself and accused of crimes. So he's in a very precarious position. So then they get the people to cry out. In verse 16, we have no. Verse 15, we have no king but Caesar. So they say to him, he writes this on the placard. It's going to be put on the cross. And they read this title. It says, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. We know it was outside the city gates. And it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And the chief priests of the Jews say to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews. But he said, but this man said, I am the King of the Jews. Then Pilate answered, what I've written, I've written. I'm not changing a word of it. You guys deal with it. And so he is mocking the Jewish leadership. He's saying this is what Rome does to any king that stands up against the king, the Caesar of Rome. Okay, verse 23, very simply. Then the soldiers, when they crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also for the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. So they say that there would have been 4 guards for each crucified man, and part of their additional pay was they get the sandals, they get the belt, they get the turban, they get the robe. And if they had an undergarment, they'd get that too. So divide 5 things 4 ways. They figure, I never have a picture of Jesus with a turban on his head. Sorry. But if they divide it, they can't cut this in pieces because it would unravel and be worthless. So they're going to, being soldiers, they roll the dice for it. And so John records this detail. And so they said, let's not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be. For this, that it says that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. My footnote there is to Psalm 22, verse 18. Let's go there. Right now, I'm going to do a share screen, and we're going to look at Psalm 22. And it says, here's an interesting thing. The psalm starts, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance and my words of groaning? Now, that is a direct quote that Jesus makes from the cross. And when I was back in graduate school, we used to go hear a British preacher named Major Ian Thomas, a World War II veteran. He was, I believe, in the North Africa Tank Corps and fought against Rommel. And he said the practice in the day, I've never heard this anywhere else, was to, since the Psalms would not have been numbered and not everybody had a Bible or a printed copy, but they would have heard these things, he would just start it out and they would know the rest of the Psalm. So Jesus was saying, according to Major Thomas, you can look this up, but it's also the cry, Father, take this cup from me. And now he is drinking that cup, and God has turned his back on him because Jesus has become sin for us. Now, let's continue, though, in Psalm 22. This is an interesting psalm. He says, look in verse 6, but I'm a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by people. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads. He relies on the Lord. Let him save him. Let the Lord rescue him, since he takes pleasure in him. And that is what they said, mocking Jesus on the cross. Come down if you're the Messiah. And he's the Messiah, but he's not coming down. He's going to finish the task God gives him. I was given over to you at birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. This would have been in their minds. Don't be far from me, because distress is near. There's no one to help me. Now, here's an obscure quote. Many bulls surround me, strong ones of Bashan encircle me. This was a literary metaphor for tough, wild, bovine bulls. I have heard discussion of the bulls in Spain used in bullfights are a small animal compared to our modern breeds, but they say the difference in them and our modern cows and bulls is the difference between wolf and German Shepherd. Is they are just about untamable. So that it's that kind of thing. I think it's referring to the Roman soldiers. Verse 14, I'm poured out like water. What happened when they pierced his side? Water ran out. All my bones are disjointed, not broken, but disjointed. My heart is like wax melting within me. And then here comes an interesting point. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You put me into the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. A gang of evildoers has closed in on me. They pierced my hands and my feet. How can Jesus have arranged to fulfill something written 1,000 years before about him? How can he have arranged his death to match this so closely unless God is involved in fulfilling prophecies? Verse 18, I can count all my bones. People look and stare at me. They divided my garments among themselves. They cast lots for my clothing. Oh my goodness. This is just chilling how detailed we'll come back, I hope, later if we have time, in just a second, to that. But this is all about the 22nd Psalm. And so the soldiers did that. John says, they divided his garments among them, and that for my clothing they cast lots. They both divided and they cast lots. Both. Who could figure that out beforehand? Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Some people think that's in a positive where it says his mother's sister was also named Mary, the wife of Clopas. Seems unreasonable that two girls in the same family would be named Mary. So I think it's not. Mary, the wife of Clopas. Interesting note. In Luke, the story about post-resurrection appearance of Jesus on the road to Emmaus, there's a guy mentioned, Cleopas, one letter different. Is that the same guy here? Spelling was not hammered down, locked down tight like it is, within the age of dictionaries and the printing press. Could this be the other person on the road to Emmaus that Jesus appears to? Husband and wife. That's a thought. Mary's sister is mentioned here, the only place in the New Testament where she is mentioned. There's a mention of a Susanna in the other Gospels, and then we have Mary Magdalene. So you put together, there's quite a group of women who are together, a support group for Mary, the mother of Jesus, and they're going to be involved in visiting the tomb and in preparing the body, very hastily preparing the body for burial that evening. Verse 26, when Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, that would be John, who wrote this book, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. And again, woman sounds to our ears kind of harsh, but this was a word of deep respect, the underlying word in that culture at that time. He says, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. So this is one of the 7 words from the cross. A very interesting study to put all those together. Verse 28, here we go. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now, the passage we just covered in Psalm 22 is my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. What he is going to do is make his last proclamation, and the other gospel writers note it's in a loud voice. So I'm going to tell you a preacher story I heard. There used to be a traveling conference speaker in Southern Baptist life named Jack Taylor. And Jack said when he was a young minister, he went to visit somebody in the hospital, and when he was hearing somebody hollering. And so after he finished his visit, he went in search of what is this noise. And he actually went up on the next floor. And when he got there, there was somebody in a room hollering, help, help, I'm dying, help me, I'm dying, help me, I'm dying. And he saw the nurse there at the nurse's station. He went over and said, does anybody know about this guy that's hollering down here? And the nurse looked up at him and said, you're a preacher, aren't you? And he said, yes, I am. And she said, preacher, have you ever known anybody who could holler that loud who was really dying? And his point was, when Jesus cried out with a loud voice, it was not at the point of physical extremity. He was deliberately laying his life down and dying because he cries out with a loud voice. And so I love that story, and I'm not 100% sure, it's extra biblical content brought back into the Bible, but here Jesus is thirsty, his tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth, and he's going to make this loud cry. And remember, there were like 6 hours or three hours of darkness over the face of the earth, an earthquake, and the Roman centurion is going to say, surely this man was the Son of God. And because of all these phenomenal things that are lining up here. But let's read what it says. And Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there. This was cheap wine or a thirst quencher, like wine vinegar. It started out to be wine and went to vinegar instead. And they would drink these sour drinks so that It would be a thirst quencher, kind of like lemonade is for us, but it would be provided there for the soldiers. And a vessel of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. The other gospel writers say that he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is the first line of Psalm 22. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? In Aramaic. And so people that overheard it said he's calling for Elijah, Eli, Eli, which is my God, in Aramaic. And they said, hey, let's see if Elijah comes to get him down. You know, he's supposed to be the Messiah. Maybe that's what's going to happen next. And so they're interested in this, and it says they take a reed or hyssop. Now, throughout the Old Testament, you can do this as kind of a side study, is there is the hyssop is used in priestly functions to sprinkle water on for cleansing, and it was also used at the time of Passover to be dipped in the lamb's blood, and they would paint the doorposts and the lintel of the door, and everybody in the house would be saved. There's also a footnote in here about this tunic that he had made of one piece, which was like the high priest's garment, which was described in a very same way, woven out of one piece without a seam. And so we are seeing reflections back to the Old Testament intent of the entire sacrificial system and all of those things that were going on, is so that Jesus comes in and is performing this high priestly function, and he's shedding his blood, and he's fulfilling all of these Old Testament prophecies so that we can be saved from the death angel, as it were, from God's judgment, to be brought into God's family, to be actually adopted in. And so that is all this symbolism and cross references that we can have. And if you've got a study Bible, you'll find lots of cross references in your center column or side notes or footnotes and so forth. So it says in verse 30, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished, and bowing his head, he gave up the spirit. Now, I think we're going to skip for next week's lesson. We're picking up after the resurrection. All of this thing about the preparation day, the body, the soldiers are going around, because the next day is especially a holy day. They can't leave the bodies on the cross. It's an insult at the highest level to the Jewish ideas of the purity of the land. And so they send order around to break their legs. And when they get to Jesus, they find he's already dead. To verify that, they pierce his side with a spear, and water gushes out. So let's now go back to Psalm 22. Let's see what it says here. The very end of Psalm 22. Let's see. All the ends of the earth, let's start at verse 27 of Psalm 22. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations, that is the Gentiles, will bow down before you. So Jesus' completed work brings in not just the Jews, but everybody, people like you and me. For kingship belongs to the Lord. And this means Jesus is truly the King of the Jews. He's the King of the Christians. He is the King of the world. He is the King of the universe. He rules the nations, the Gentiles. All who prosper on the earth will eat and bow down. All those who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Everybody who dies. Paul quotes that later in one of his epistles. Every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Lord. Even the one who cannot preserve his life. Now, I think that's in a positive. Jesus lays down his life. He doesn't preserve it for us. Their descendants will serve him. The next generation will be told about the Lord. They will come and declare his righteousness to a people yet to be born. They will declare what he has done. In the Hebrew here is what he has accomplished, what he has finished. So it is as though Jesus brackets Psalm 22 with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, with it is finished, to point people to this, and they respond with astonishment. They're the astronomical phenomenon of the sun being darkened in the middle of the day during the time of the full moon. So it's not an eclipse like we know it. And then there's the earthquake, a mighty earthquake, and then the outcry of the Roman centurion who was in charge of the death detail, who said, surely this man is the Son of God. So that's our passage for today. Kind of went just a little bit past it. And we're going to take time now to open up the mics and let you guys, if you've got insights, observations, another source that you are aware of, let's know. Let's talk about these things. Any further questions, anything like that? You're welcome to open up your mics. What you got? Cricket noises. Okay. Well, we'll come back and do this again next week. How's that? And I want to thank you for being on. And you've got the link so you can share the recorded lesson with anybody that might have interest. Stephanie, you just unmuted. What you got for us?
I was just going to thank you for doing this.
Okay. All right. And remember to pray for each other and for the other prayer requests we have in the email going out. Very serious situations going on there. And everybody have a happy Mother's Day. And if you're not, then happy Mother's Day to the mother nearest to you in your life. How's that?
That's great. Thank you. That's
Thank you much.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Tim, good to see you on.
Yeah. Oh my God.
All right. Well, all right. We'll just log it off.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.